Well, first of all, these tests are not a violation of any UN Security Council resolution. If your viewers check the resolutions themselves, they'll see that there's nothing about conventional weapons and conventional missile capabilities. The only thing that exists in the resolution is the request, the calling upon Iran not to build missiles that are specifically made for nuclear weapons. And Iran has never had a nuclear weapon program. The United States uses this propaganda in order to put pressure on Iran to weaken its defenses. And Iran is not going to do so. So I think it's very important for the international community to ignore American propaganda. The reason why the United States has been unable to attack Iran, to invade Iran, or to destroy Iran like it destroyed Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya is because Iran has a robust military defense capability.
Is this perhaps Tehran flexing its muscle to say it is either our way or the highway?
No, Iran is flexing its muscle, but it's to say that we will preserve our sovereignty. We will not allow the United States to carry out a foreign policy that is similar to a godfather-like policy. The Iranians see the United States as behaving in a thuggish manner. Iran's defense capabilities are what prevents the country from being attacked by the United States. Iran is surrounded by around 50 U.S. military bases. And the Americans are armed with nuclear weapons, thousands of fighter jets, and tens of thousands of soldiers surrounding Iran. So I think it's any country which has self-dignity and wishes to preserve its sovereignty would behave in the same manner as does Iran.
And how do these tests affect the relationships of Tehran with those who have been backing it against U.S. sanctions?
Well, the Russians, the Chinese, Iranian neighbors, the non-aligned movement, they've all consistently supported Iran's position, not only with regards to its defense capabilities, but also the non-aligned movement has consistently over the past few decades supported Iran's nuclear program because experts know quite well that Iran's nuclear program was always peaceful, and that like the propaganda with regards to Iran's missile defense capability, the United States was basically engaging in propaganda warfare against Iran's nuclear program to create fear among the international community. The irony, of course, is that while Iran's nuclear program always was peaceful, and now, of course, Iran's nuclear program is partially shut down as a part of the nuclear deal, even though it was peaceful. But the irony is that the Israeli regime has, according to some estimates, up to 400 nuclear weapons.
And where does this leave the International Atomic Agent or Energy Agency, which has always argued that Iran is conforming to?
Well, that is the problem, that when the agency or when any international agency behaves in an independent fashion, the United States ignores it. But if an agency under U.S. pressure makes a statement, then the United States uses that as evidence. So, for example, with regards to Yemen, the Americans and the Saudis are carrying out a Holocaust. They are massacring the Yemenis. They're imposing starvation on millions of people. It is the most barbaric thing that we've seen probably since World War II with regards to imposing starvation on a whole nation. But the United States forces some committee in the UN to show a couple of rockets or a couple of anti-tank missiles and blame Iran, whereas the Americans are giving the Saudis tens of billions of dollars and the United Arab Emirates tens of billions of dollars to massacre the population. They're giving all sorts of weapons, and these regimes are using illegal weapons. They're using cluster bombs, and they're specifically targeting weddings, schools, hospitals, funerals, and it has become so outrageous that even the Western media is now reporting this, and especially after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Before that, the Western media was silent as well. So it's extraordinary how the United States is bullied into abiding by U.S. Saudi policy and ignoring the atrocities being carried out in Yemen, yet they claim that a couple of anti-tank missiles were somehow linked to Iran.
And Britain said that the types of missiles fired had capabilities that go way beyond legitimate defensive needs. Are they really?
No, that's nonsense. The Iranian missile defense capability is legitimate. It's within the framework of international law. And of course, it is, again, ironic that the British would say this when the British have nuclear weapons, when they have bases in the Persian Gulf alongside Iran's borders, whereas Britain is a small NATO country that is thousands of kilometers away from this part of the world. So while Iran has a missile defense capability to defend its sovereignty, I don't think it's really meaningful or appropriate for the British to say anything about the legitimacy or the necessity of Iran's missile defense capability.
And having said that, Professor, any indication perhaps that the missile could reach significantly beyond the Middle East?
No, the Iranians have said for many years now that the maximum range that they are working on for their missile defense is 2,000 kilometers, and that basically covers the West Asian region, so that countries like or regimes like Israel cannot carry out any threats against Iran, and so that the United States military bases in the region are accessible to Iran in case the United States launches some sort of aggression against the country. As I said, by having a very robust indigenous defense capability, the Iranians have prevented the United States from carrying out aggression. If Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya had those capabilities, we wouldn't have seen the destruction of their countries. And if Syria had those defense capabilities and Yemen had those defense capabilities, starvation wouldn't be imposed upon Yemen today, and Syria would not have tens of thousands of foreign extremists funded by NATO, the United States, the Saudis, and others.
Well, Professor, researchers and political analysts and think tanks are of the view that such a program would not violate the international deal intended to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon or any other agreement. And still, if it is completed, it would potentially affect Europe and perhaps the United States. Are you also of the same school of thought?
No, I don't think anyone who is serious, any of these researchers who are serious, would make such a claim. Remember, the think tanks in the United States are extraordinarily corrupt. They are funded by the Saudis, they're funded by the Emiratis, they're funded by pro-Israeli groups in the United States and the military-industrial complex in the United States. So many of the statements and papers and articles put out by American think tanks and the American media are linked to these vested interests, are linked to the demands or the needs of these interest groups. The reality on the ground is that Iran's capabilities are specific for this region. They have nothing to do with Europe. They have everything to do with the areas surrounding Iran. Why would Iran in any way or form want to target Europe? That's there's no sense in such an argument. But when the Israeli regime constantly threatens Iran with military strikes, when the American regime constantly threatens Iran with military attacks, then when the Saudi regime constantly threatens Iran and the Crown Prince says that Mohammed bin Salman says he wants to take the war inside Iran, he says this in an interview, then I think Iran has every reason to strengthen its missile defense capability. And keep this in mind. that according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, whose job it is to monitor military expenditure across the world, Iran is 19th in the world in military spending, after Saudi Arabia, after the Israeli regime, after Iraq, after Turkey, and even after the United Arab Emirates, which has a population, citizens are no more than 1 million people. So the United Arab Emirates, which is waging a war and starving the people of Yemen, has only an indigenous population or passport-holding population of 1 million. Their military budget is greater than that of Iran.
Right, and it's quite interesting, Professor, that there's actually compelling evidence that Iran is now developing a long-range missile technology. But then thank you so much for your insights. We do appreciate it. That was Professor Seyed Marandi from the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran in Iran.